The Norris Group would like to thank the following platinum partners: the San Diego Creative Real Estate Investors Association, InvestClub, Inland Empire Real Estate Investment Club, ThinkRealty, Wilson Investment Properties, Coach Fullerton, First Lending Solutions, Property Radar, the Apartment Owners Association, MVT Productions, and Realty 411.
Good evening, everybody. If you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. Thank you. All right, that was supposed to get you quiet. Good evening. My name is Aaron Norris, and I would like to welcome you to our 11th annual I Survived Real Estate. Woohoo! On video, I might look terrible and sweating. Our online feed is going terrible right now, so for those, if you're online frustrated and you're not able to see this until the video, and I'm apologizing early, I'm so sorry. It's just not working. So much stress in the background. But for those of you here tonight, I just want to say a quick thank you to the people in the background. MVT Pro and White House Catering has been here for 11 years, making this run as smoothly as possible. So thank you, White House Catering, and you don't want me cooking. Let's just put it that way. Also, our team here tonight, we've got Robin and Vicky up at the front, Craig, Holly, Donna, Joey, Don, Mike, and Rich. All of our team, small team but mighty, with 400 people here, hopefully making you as happy as possible. So thanks for coming. So some of you are looking around the room like, I have no idea why I'm here. I just showed up and I got a free ticket. So some of you will be very happy, others of you will not be happy. I Survive Real Estate brings together friends from all over the state and experts all over from the United States to talk about real estate and to raise money for charity. Cancer has been our choice of a cause since we started this 11 years ago. And will you please stand if cancer has affected you or somebody you know in your life? Thank you. And that's why we do it. With your help tonight, we crossed the $80,000 mark for Make-A-Wish in St. Jude, and it brings our 11-year total to $860,000. That's pretty cool. We're getting so close to $1 million. Hopefully you guys will keep coming out. We sold out before we even officially launched the event this year, thanks to all the sponsors that supported us. We've never had that happen. Thank you for making that a possibility, and hopefully in a couple years we'll hit that $1 million mark and you will all be a part of it. So if we get the live feed going, you'll be happy, but for those of you in the room, you might not know that the Norris Group pays 100% for the event, so actually 100% of the donations tonight, the sponsorships, the tickets actually do go to charity. So when I say $860,000, it's really $860,000. But there's a little pressure. If you're at the table and you didn't pay anything, hopefully you'll visit the tables. If you're watching the video and you like the show tonight, if you go to isurvivedrealestate.com and hit that video link, there will be links for you to donate. 100% tax deductible. It doesn't go through us, so do a good thing if you like the show. You'll be seeing all of our sponsors throughout tonight, and we have a really deep professional voice that says it very professionally, and I really like that. But I do have to call out a special few from InvestClub. Yvonne Susich, Lee Atkins, and Bailey Varnish, would you stand and be recognized? These three, thank you. These three competed in a little bit of a competition and raised over $2,000, and the entire team raised over $7,000. So thank you. Tonight, we are raising money for two awesome charities that support kids with life-threatening conditions. The first one, I'm going to welcome Odette Gutierrez with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, representing St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, but we're going to watch a short video.
Gracie had her 5th birthday. We had her a pool party. She had spiked a fever, got to 102. We took her to our local ER. Our platelets were a little low, but nothing extreme. They told us she had mono. And she told us, I just want to refer you to St. Jude. Let's get her checked out and be certain. That afternoon, she called at about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and she said less than 1% of the cells on the flow came back abnormal. The only way I can completely rule out leukemia is if we do a bone marrow aspiration. We took Gracie back that following Tuesday morning. We had a bone marrow aspiration, and that afternoon she confirmed that it was our worst nightmare. Dr. J.I. said, Gracie has what we hoped that it wasn't. It's leukemia. The first question we asked was, what are we going to do about it? And she said, not only are we going to treat it, we're going to cure it. They put a team together, and we had Michelle was our nurse practitioner, Corey was our nurse, and Dr. J. Hall was our physician. We knew right then we were in the best place that we could be. Gracie has grown to love the people at St. Jude. She is happy about coming. It's not a sad thing to her, which helps. St. Jude's never been sad. It's amazing that this place even does exist. We do 120 weeks of chemotherapy. After the 120 weeks is up, 2.5 years of treatment, then they'll check her bone marrow again, another bone marrow aspiration, to be certain that every bit of the leukemia is gone. There's no telling how much it costs, but every bit of it is covered by St. Jude. I would hope that Gracie grows up and does something to change the world. I want her to come back and not a 94% success rate for ALL. I wanted 100. I want her to be the reason that it changes, that somebody else looks forward to coming to St. Jude, that they get told any type of cancer it's curable. I can't tell you enough how wonderful it is to all the people that donate to St. Jude. Without you, everybody that donates, there wouldn't be a Gracie. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. We couldn't tell you enough how much it means for you to save Gracie's life.
Thank you. It's always an honor to be here representing St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Thank you, Erin. Thank you to the Norris Group and to all of you who so generously support St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. As Gracie, I think, said, and I think all of us hope that there will be a day where the survival rate of pediatric cancer hits 100%. And so thankfully there is a hospital that is working to do that. St. Jude Children's Research Hospital earlier this year made a $100 million investment in St. Jude Global, an initiative to bring pediatric survival rates in countries that have limited resources because it doesn't matter where a child lives shouldn't determine if a child lives. And so again, St. Jude continues to be a leader in the fight against pediatric cancer. And actually just yesterday, St. Jude actually made an announcement of a 5-year collaboration with the World Health Organization aimed at transforming cancer care worldwide to cure at least 60% of children with 6 of the most common types of cancer by 2030. 60%. And St. Jude is able to dream big and realize these things because of the support of people like you, and at no cost to families. So if no family at St. Jude ever receives a bill, not for their treatment, their travel, their housing, or their food, so that all that family has to worry about is helping their child live. So thank you again for all that you do for the kids of St. Jude.
Next, while we welcome the CEO of Make-A-Wish of Inland Empire in Orange County, Stephanie McCormick, watch another video.
A child who is undergoing treatment for a life-threatening medical condition has so much of normal childhood taken away from them, so much of their decision-making ability, so much of their normal experiences with playmates and friends and siblings. It is so long and so arduous. It robs so many of the normal childhood experiences from a child and from their family.
You run into a family that is out of control with their life. They have circumstances imposed upon them that they never would have signed up for or dreamed that they would be in that position.
There are medications that we can provide, there are treatments that we can administer, and yet there are pieces missing from that can only be filled by the impact of a wish experience.
The beauty of Make-A-Wish is it's incredibly simple. It is that intangible object that, quite honestly, I cannot order from the pharmacy. I cannot write a prescription for.
You see a child before they go on their wish, and when they come back with their family after the wish, it's often like seeing a totally different child.
You just see it in their faces, this idea of thinking outside their current moment in time.
It's an unsaid power that these experiences can give these kids. And you know, these are kids that are living longer. They're living better. They're having more fun in their life. And it all started with one experience, and that was their wish.
My favorite wish is the next one. And the one after that. And the next 10. And the next 100. Because as with life, a wish has less to do with what has been and more to do with what's coming up.
Thanks, Aaron. Ladies and gentlemen, I want from the bottom of my heart to thank each and every one of you for your continued participation in the I Survived Real Estate, especially with this incredible young man here. I also wanted to share with you that I did a little math today. This is our 6th year of being a co-recipient with our incredible partner at St. Jude. And during that time, we have received nearly $325,000 from you all. And that represents nearly 70 of the incredible wishes of which you saw a few this evening. So thank you. Our chapter in Make-A-Wish, I'm really thrilled to be sharing the stage with our partner, St. Jude, because a lot of the children that start there end with us at Make-A-Wish. So it's really an incredible partnership and a collaborative that we have together. Last year, our chapter in the Orange County and Inland Empire area granted a record 341 wishes. Yay. That's the incredible news. The somewhat challenging news is that in our pipeline and the children that are eligible for a wish is right around 700. So we're only a little over halfway there. So we're going to keep going, and I can't wait till you hit that million. So on behalf of Make-A-Wish, all of our incredible Wish kids and our Wish families, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will leave you with this. I think you saw it. There is absolutely nothing more powerful than the smile of a Wish child. It is life transformational. Thank you.
This weekend, if you don't listen to our radio show and podcast, I have the honor of interviewing Stephanie and one of the Wish kids that got to meet his, he is still with us, he is thriving. Josiah, what a character. I would like to highlight the people who work in the nonprofit industry don't always do it because it's the most glorious job out there. Oh my goodness, some of the things that they have to deal with and the emotions is just very difficult. I just inspired you to please listen to the radio show. And I didn't cry listening to Josiah because he is just so dang awesome. And just the Thrive for Life and talking to the parents of what it means to the parents for that one time to get to see their kid come back to life and to enjoy something that they never thought was possible. And this kid was bragging nonstop about how he was still texting some of the ball players he met in Northern California. So it's pretty awesome. Thank you for the sponsors in the room. We're going to be highlighting you a little bit more, having a little bit of technical difficulty tonight. I needed to tell you to take the time, silence your cell phone. Vibrate's great, feels better that way. I need you to make sure to unwrap those hard candies. If you don't, the guy next to you or the gal next to you that are looking nice might punch you. You're welcome to do so. And finally, if you're using social media, we encourage you to do so. Just use hashtag ISRE. With that, I get to hand over the reins to somebody who's been in the years for over 35 years. Earned all those gray hairs. Yeah. I'm kidding, because I'm getting them now. So he's been an investor, builder, a hard money lender. He hosts our radio show, takes great joy in charts and yellow lining, really boring legislation. And I hope I get to inherit just half of the awesomeness that he is. So, Dad.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Aaron, thank you for this is your brainchild, and look what it's turned into. 10 years ago, I had just finished speaking. I got off the podium. A gentleman approached me. He was the vice president of a billion-dollar company. He said, I want you to know I have a lot of respect for you. I said, I appreciate that. And he said, I also feel really sorry for you. I was confused. I said, why is that? He said, well, as good as your company is, that there's large companies like ours in the space now, and you will not have any chance to survive. Anybody that knows me knows, well, that's all you need to do too. So I said, I want you to take down a phone number. It's 951-780-5856. That's my phone number, and call it in 5 years, and I guarantee you I will pick it up. That was 10 years ago, and the company that wasn't supposed to survive, it has raised over $850,000 for charity, and he's done it. We've accomplished that because you're sitting in the audience, and guess what? You're not supposed to be here either. That makes me feel really good. About 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I had, you go over these questions, and as much as I am familiar with this stuff, I decided to take a break. And I had a property that I had just done some work on in Riverside that I'm going to sell. And I thought, Aaron has mentioned to me 4 large companies that are buyers. And so I got online and I approached OfferPad, Zillow, Open Door, and Knock for an offer. Knock responded, we're not available in your area yet, okay, which is fine. Zillow, not available in the area. Open Door said, we're currently not buying homes in gated communities, which this was. OfferPad, I completed the request. They sent, we'd like to get pictures. I said, I have none. And they said, well, then we can't make an offer. So I said that to say this. Now, there may be a day where they improve their model and all that, but you know what? I have a feeling if you're really good at what you do, you'll be around here 5 years from now as well. Where is Fixer Jay? Aha. We created the Roney Award in honor of Jim Rohn, the man that changed my entire life in 3 hours in 1981. Got drugged to a seminar I didn't want to go to, sat in the very front table, which I really hated, I was told it was a 3-hour-long deal, and I thought, there's no way I'll make it. That's 6 sermons, man. I can't stand it. About 10 minutes into it, I wrote my first note on top of the page. And it's one of many notes. I still have them in it's all broken, ripped up binder. One day I'll bring it up here. But he changed my entire life. And so we created this award for people that have had an amazing impact on other people's lives. And today we add another person to that list of distinguished people. This list of people, very different, but they have 2 things that are very much in common. They positively affected the people they taught, and they had a great reputation. Tonight we're going to honor Fixer Jay DeCima. He's a seasoned real estate investor with nearly 50 years of experience. Since the early 70s, he's specializing in fixing up ugly homes and small apartment buildings. Today, Jay spends the majority of his time managing and overseeing his investment houses and training others who wish to pursue the lucrative profession. We have a video to show you of people whose lives you have impacted, and we can start that right now.
When I think of you, I think of 3 words. I think of smart, funny, and a gifted teacher and writer. So maybe that's 4 words. But your writings and your teachings are easy to understand and always entertaining. And as your students will testify, they really work.
Through Jay's books, lectures, and seminars, he shows a way to buying ugly properties or fixer-uppers, renting them, and turning them into cash flow and profit.
He's got an awesome model that he uses that's very unique, that not a lot of people are using. And he'll give you all of the data that you need in order to get that mastered.
One time after you helped me buy 85 properties, I thought I was just really hot real estate investor. And one day on one of our telephone mentoring calls when I had a problem, you said, Dan, you really just have your name on 82 deeds or 85 deeds. I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, you have to manage these things now. If you get into the management, that's where you're going to make the big money over the years.
You've really been inspirational on how to run a business and treat people fairly.
I first met Jay DeCima back in the mid-90s, and I was so impressed with him that I drove the 10 hours all the way to Redding, California to take his great boot camp on buying houses.
You're full of knowledge and wisdom. With your white hair and gold teeth, you are handsome. But most importantly, Jay, you're a genuine, real McCoy.
You have been such an inspiration and helped us so many people, friends of mine and myself, with your books and your classes.
Appreciate the books, appreciate the wisdom.
Thank you so much for the decades you've given us, for the help you've given each and every one of us here at NorcalREIA.
You're one of the few people that I always refer students to, the real deal, if there ever was one.
He invited me, an unknown at the time, to speak on his cruise where I got to meet Dan and his beautiful wife Victoria Shea. Jay said he liked my writing style back in the day in my newsletter so much that without me knowing it, he called his senior editor at Wiley & Sons and he convinced them to let this unknown guy write a book as an unpublished author.
I've known Jay DeCima for 20 years. In that time, he's been my friend and mentor. I can't say enough about Jay's professionalism and extensive knowledge of the real estate investor market.
You're going to be a better real estate investor and a better person for working with him.
He has a way of really making you believe that you can believe in yourself, that you can do this for yourself and get it off the ground.
Loved learning from you over the years, really enjoyed all of your knowledge, all your discussion, all your information, but more importantly, your wisdom. And thank you for sharing that wisdom with all of us.
Thank you for your input into my life, into my friends' lives, and so many people in helping us to think about real estate in a different way.
You always said, make sure you make this business a business, not a hobby.
I've been so grateful for the inspiration, the leadership, and the integrity which you taught me to run a business with.
He always gives us such great advice.
You truly are one of a kind, a category of one.
Congratulations, Jay. You've earned it.
Congratulations on an honor well deserved.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Jay. We love you.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jay. You're the best.
Fixer Jay, come on up and get your award. stand. Thank you very much for all you've done.
Thank you.
I also might say he sold over 250,000 books, and not very many of us have ever sold one. So congratulations. That's heavy.
Well, that is heavy.
That is heavy.
If you can't hurt somebody with an award, it doesn't count.
If I were to drop this, you know, I'm kind of weakened here in my old age, but I mean, I haven't got a foundation this strong on any of my houses. I really haven't.
That's classic. All right. Congratulations, my friend. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for everything, everybody. And were those paid announcements?
No,
up
they
there?
weren't.
I don't know how you got Schaub to recommend me, my gosh. But, you know, I'm very, very thankful for this. I've been in this business, I hate to say this, over 50 years. It's been a delight all the way through. And when Bruce called me here a few months back and told me that he was going to present me with this award, I asked him, or I think I asked him, I says, is this anything like an Oscar? It doesn't look too much like one, does it?
No.
But I think he said to me, it's about as close as an old fixer guy like you will ever get to Hollywood. So I'll tell you what, as far as I'm concerned, this award to me is just as good as an Oscar. And I'll tell you something that is a little bit different between the Oscars and me right here tonight. I am not going to badmouth our country and the free enterprise system that made me a successful real estate investor. Again, thanks all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, buddy. All right. We are now going to start asking questions to really smart people. What's fun about this is I get to ask some questions I want answers to myself, and you've also given me some questions that you would like answers to, so it'll be fun tonight. We're going to have two gentlemen come up here that have been here before. Doug Duncan. Doug is Fannie Mae's Senior Vice President and Chief Economist. He's responsible for providing all forecasts and analysis on the economy, housing, and mortgage markets for Fannie Mae. He is considered one of the top real estate economists in the world. He's also been a big supporter of real estate investors, having gotten several of us to Fannie Mae and gotten to speak our mind and see if we could convince them to extend financing to investors. So Doug, welcome back again. And John Burns. Yeah, those two would be better. John Burns is the CEO and founder of John Burns Real Estate Consulting. He helps business executives make informed housing and industry investment decisions by giving them the most accurate analysis and portfolio investment advice possible. John is co-author of Big Shifts Ahead, a book that makes demographic trends easier to understand, quantify, and anticipate. We welcome you back too, John. You know, it's funny. I worked 18 hours on these questions.
I believe it.
But then when I get into the room and everything that you see blue marked is a change after or an addition, so it never ends, and you finally just say, okay.
Well, my forecast is like that.
Oh, is it?
Right.
I hadn't thought of this when I actually typed it up and printed it out, but I think maybe I'll open with this, and I'll start with John. A year ago, this is a year ago that you were here, and a year has passed. Any surprises for you? Something you thought wouldn't occur that has?
Well, I didn't think we'd have a tax act. That was a big stimulus to the economy and was a big change.
Okay.
That would be the biggest thing I think I'm surprised by.
Okay. I think maybe, do they need to speak close to the mic? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, you got to almost eat it.
It was the Tax Act.
And Doug?
I think that's true. That wasn't in our forecast at that time. I would agree that that's probably the biggest thing. We were not surprised by the fact that there wasn't a health care bill. That's yet to be seen.
Okay. John, you wrote Big Shifts Ahead, one of the best books ever in our industry, and there's no joke. That's it only took you 9,000 hours to get a $20 product produced.
And I don't have 250,000 sales either, so congratulations to you.
Really? Well,
not yet anyway.
It's just one of those books. It really helps you understand maybe what's coming, and that's an important thing. Can you explain? There's four factors, influential factors. Can you talk just what those are, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so everybody talks about the noise, what's this, what's that, but it helped me to group it into four things. So usually there's some sort of government policy that has some major changes, and the Tax Act would be a good example of that. The second would be the economy. You can't control the economy, but the economy obviously has a big impact. But I think the important thing to remember is it impacts people differently depending on how old they are at the time. And I could walk you through the Great Recession and how people aged in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, it impacted very differently. The third would be new technologies, and everybody's talking about the self-driving car as a good example. And then the fourth would be societal shifts that are very hard to predict, like people getting married before they have kids, or after they have kids instead of before they have kids, and other things that create housing demand.
Okay. Doug, are you surprised by the strength of the economy?
No, the
shucks.
Yeah. The interesting question is how long it will remain strong. The bet that was in the tax bill was if you cut corporate taxes, will business fixed investment pick up because the hurdle rate for new investments is lower?
Okay.
Will that generate productivity? And will that and the tax cut on the personal tax side will increase after-tax returns to going to work? And the one question was, are there people actually sitting on the sideline that can come in and do that? Or will the Fed see all this as inflationary because unemployment gets too low? So our view was, if you looked at the data, there were people still there to go to work. The complicating factor, which I suggested questions how long this will go, is that then after the tax bill, there was this huge spending bill that had no related revenue, which is going to increase our debt and deficit, and the Fed's going to respond to that. But the growth, the initial burst of growth, we didn't forecast it as high as it. We didn't forecast 4.2, but we were over 3.
We're in our 9th year of recovery. Isn't that unusually long?
Well, we had a recovery about that long in the 80s. We had another one in the 90s.
Okay.
It's been unusually weak to be that long. This is the weakest recovery post-World War II.
Does that mean it may give it a reason to have more legs?
Well, what I tell people is just because it's old doesn't mean it will die.
Yeah.
However, all of them have. I'm operating on that basis myself, too.
The reason this is important, there's a lot of people here that attended a seminar I taught about 2 years ago, and I said it had a title, 2% mortgage rates and $40 trillion in debt. And I thought we would have a recession by the end of 2018, and that we'd have a reduction in interest rates, and that didn't occur. I'm sorry about that, I really am.
Well, before the tax cut, we had a recession near term, but that changed it.
Now you confess to that. Okay.
He's got so many forecasts, he's got one that was right.
Absolutely. If you're going to forecast often.
Right.
So government policy, you mentioned one, but there's another one that really is significant to real estate very recently, and that's increasing the standard deduction.
Yeah.
How do you think that influences real estate?
Well, do you want to talk about California or elsewhere? Because really, the standard deduction has not been an issue for people buying homes in most parts of the country for quite some time, because when it got to $12,000 and mortgage rates were 4 and the home price was $250, you weren't getting a deduction. So outside of California, that has been disappearing for a long time. And I know it's a benefit, and I think it's a hurt to the young, affluent people that are trying to buy along the coasts. But I really don't think it's a major issue. I think people still want to buy homes, and they'll figure out a way to do it. And that may hurt you, but you're also got a 4.5% interest rate, which isn't too bad.
Yeah, the bottom 30% of income tax filers have never itemized. They all have taken the standard deduction.
Okay. So you don't see that. It's one thing.
It's hurting a small percentage of people nationally.
Okay. Doug, what usually causes recessions to start?
Normally it's some imbalance, whether it's in the goods sector or inventories, oversized inventories, or it could be in the credit market. It's a little bit different every time. So if somebody tells you with certainty what will cause the next recession, be suspicious.
Okay.
There are some things out there that we think are worth watching, like the covenants in some commercial debt and the level of commercial debt that's out there. The Dodd-Frank changed some things in who makes markets in some kinds of credit markets, and it moved out of the banking sector into the
Private sector? No?
That's a good try.
It's a good try.
It's a heck of a deal.
I was trying to think about my answer. I wasn't listening to you.
The shadow banking sector. That's what I was trying to think of. Sorry about that. I'm on East Coast time. And the question is, if there is a shock in the financial market, will they have the balance sheet that will allow the continued liquidity in that space? That's one of the things people are worrying about today.
Can I answer that? Because I think I've got a simpler answer. So, I'm not putting. You insulted him when you said he's one of the top economists, because he is the top.
Okay, thank you.
I told him that on the way up here.
Not if you ask my mother.
Yeah. 11 of the last 12 recessions, going back to the one in the 1929, were caused by excessive debt. Industries that grew too fast and borrowed too much money to do it, and I can show you the 11 of the 12. The only one was the Bretton Woods Act that was different in the 70s. So that's exactly where I look. And it's consistent with what Doug said. Who's got growing too fast and borrowing too much money? And there's a lot of areas you can look at, particularly in the bond market right now. And it's not the housing market, it's other industries.
A fun fact, at the peak in 2007, global debt to GDP was 287%.
Okay.
Today, it's 295%.
There you go. Yeah. Mortgages are down, but everything else is up.
Absolutely.
John, you said you were really concerned about the health sector. As far as, is that the type of thing you're concerned about?
Publicly traded health companies have 300% more debt than they did in 2009.
Okay.
You do the math. And I was sitting next to somebody in the healthcare industry, so I'm going to have to answer to that when I get back there. But they're growing. The bond, and I'm talking about publicly traded companies. The bond market's been wide open, wide open. The S&P and Moody's have both said this. If you add up all the ratings they've done of companies that have borrowed, it's the lowest ratings ever. And why not? If you're running a business, you can get fixed rate debt or adjustable rate debt super low, really cheap to grow your business. Of course you're going to do it.
One of the problems with the last debt cycle is there were bets against the outcome called collateralized debt obligations. That now do we have that in great quantity, only in different industries?
That's my understanding, is that they've cut up the corporate debt markets just like they cut up the mortgage market last time, and they're selling all sorts of tranches to insurance companies. And there's been articles in Bloomberg and other places on this, so it's public info, it's just not getting a lot of attention.
Okay, so we have potentially something that could happen there that would be That would cascade into other areas, obviously. Stock market wouldn't like that, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my area of expertise. It's just something I want to know more about.
Okay. All right, well, let's talk about an area of expertise that you do have. And you talk about those 4 factors. One of them was societal shifts. So during the next 10 years, there's over 65 is going to grow by 10 million people.
Yeah.
The next category down is going to grow almost none. And then the category under 45 will have 3.3 million. So what are the ramifications for housing for those sectors, and how can investors do the right thing?
Yeah, you're seeing one of the ramifications right now is that the move-up market is slowed. I mean, there literally are fewer people in their 40s than there were 10 years ago. So, and you typically buy a move-up home in your late 30s, early 40s. It's not down dramatically, but it's not a growth market. And then you throw on top of that the fact that those people are moving up, but their current mortgage is 3.5, and honey, you want to move and give up our 3.5 and go get a 4.5. We actually surveyed 8,500 homeowners, and about a quarter of them said I would not move in that scenario. So we think that's about an 11% reduction overall to existing home sales volume that we're going through with between the demographics and the rising interest rate. That's not a death knell for housing. It's just fewer transactions.
Okay.
And it's also fewer homes on the market. So it's not, that's why people forget that. So it's fewer buyers, but it's also they're not listing their home either, so you see fewer transactions.
What about the 10 million more people turning 65 and over? How does that affect housing?
Yeah, my numbers I think are actually 18 million over the next 10 years. So it's a very big number. Their shift is, it used to be, I'm hitting retirement, I'm gonna go play golf. Now I'm gonna find where my kids got a job and the grandkids are, and so we're seeing them move to those areas. We're doing a lot of feasibility work where people are selling their homes or maybe keeping it or renting it out, and then turning around and becoming renters. So actually older homeowners turning into renters for a variety of reasons, and maybe one is the lack of a tax deduction. And the remodeling business I'm very bold up on. I mean, the homes were not built for that many people over the age of 65, so the opportunities to remodel are just fantastic. And I'm sure the ones that are fixing up homes are selling them to a lot of those type of people and putting different things in them than just family-oriented homes.
That's all consistent with our survey data of households. The boomers are basically saying we're going to age in place. We want the kids to come home and bring the grandkids, but we've got $6.5 to $7 trillion of equity. So we're going to tap some of that equity, and we're going to make this house habitable for ourselves as we age in place. And we see that in our data at Fannie Mae. We can track cash out refinances, and while refinances in total have fallen, the share of them that are extracting cash is rising continually. So they're actually doing that. And I also was speaking with somebody at one of the big building products firms about whether or not this remodeling thing was real from their perspective, and they said that's the sector of their sales that's actually growing. Also, if you go on and look at Google Trends data, I don't know if any of you look at Google Trends data, but most of the housing, as you know, housing has slowed down now, and in fact sales this year in total are probably lower than they were last year. The one piece of the Google Trends data search that is rising is the remodeling space.
Yeah.
As an economist, top economist, and I agree with John.
Target.
How much emphasis do you put on an inverted yield curve?
Boy, that's really interesting. You've got different Fed governors squaring off against some believe it matters and others don't believe it matters. It's a pretty consistently correlated relationship to economic downturns. If you look at the instances where the 10-year Treasury rate has fallen below the 90-day Treasury rate within 12 to 18 months every time there has been a recession. So it's very strongly correlated. Whether it's the cause or not, you can argue over your economic models, but it's very highly correlated when it's the 90-day Treasury and the 10-year Treasury.
If the Fed continues its pace in the short end, when will that crossover likely happen?
It really depends on what happens on two things.
Okay.
One is the continued pace of growth. If this expansion grows stronger and longer than what the current forecasts are, you probably won't see that reversal, especially if that is tied to the European Central Bank actually raising rates or easing as well. Because I don't know if those of you who watch bond market yields, last week there was a speech by Draghi who suggested inflation in Europe was growing faster than they thought, and the US 10-year Treasury rose. So it's not just about our market.
I'm confused about something. When I looked up what a 10-year T-bill was in 1932, middle of the Great Depression, GDP growth was minus 23%, 25% unemployment, and the 10-year was 3.65%. And right now it's little under 3.1. So which one of those numbers is completely wrong? Because we have full employment, basically, and GDP growth, say, at an average of 3 for the first half. How can those two worlds have gotten it right when each was so... I mean, we're at a peak economy, and now they're at the depths of the all-time greatest. So did we have that big of a problem that we've just avoided? That's what that kind of told me. That scared me.
Well, there's no question that had the monetary authorities, Bernanke and Paulson and the others, Geithner, stepped in to save the banking system, we would have gotten there. We were heading way north of 10% unemployment. Frankly, to me, the one program that was instituted that the public really never knew about was corporations go to short-term credit markets, not in the banks, but in the bond market, to borrow money to meet payroll. And that market froze, and the Fed opened a conduit which went from $0 to $300 billion in 90 days to fund the employees of Ford Motor and Chrysler and US Steel and all of those corporations. That reestablished confidence in the capital markets, and they wound that program down over about another 6 to 9 months. To me, that was one of the most successful federal government programs in the history of the country. And it kept unemployment at 10 or 11% at where it could have easily been at 20% or north.
Okay. John, you talk about something in your podcast, talk about maturing markets. So how do you determine a market is maturing? What is it that you look at?
Well, it's usually something is gone on for too long or get completely out of whack, and it's not construction this time around. There's very little construction in almost every market in the country, but it's affordability. When you have a 9-year expansion and low interest rates the whole time, and supply cannot keep up with demand, you have prices that go through the roof. And so we think that the next recession is going to be pretty painful for pricing. Not as painful on volume and not as painful on construction, although pricing hurts. So the markets that are frothy like that, like we're sitting in one of them, we're calling mature, which means we think we're near the end of the cycle, but I can't tell you whether it's this year, next year, or the year after. It's just risky.
You're talking about in California? Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you expect to see real estate prices go up nationally for the next year or two, or?
Yeah, that's our forecast.
Okay.
So we don't see a lot of supply in the market coming from the new or the resale market, and I buy into Doug's latest forecast that the economy is going to keep growing, and so that should be. And actually, I also think wage growth is going to be stronger than most people think in a low unemployment world that makes sense, that will fuel some good price appreciation. Not as much as we saw last year, but maybe about 2 points less.
Do you see the end of this cycle mimicking the end of any other cycle that we've experienced?
Well, it feels a little bit like the 99, 2000 period where housing was still coming off of its back after the S&L crisis. We weren't overbuilding the market. We had a frothy tech market, particularly in NASDAQ. It kind of feels like that. The difference would be the Fed funds rate was at 6.5 and he dropped it to 1 almost instantaneously and used housing to prop up the economy. And given the lack of supply, and I talked about hitting the debt market, the industry that has hit the debt market the least is housing. I think housing, if I were the Fed chair, I would look at all the industries and say, that looks like the healthiest industry to me. What can I do to help it get going? So that I see a parallel there. There's some differences, but some parallels.
Okay, but you think that California, in this next down cycle, will lose price?
I mean, by down cycle, I mean we're actually shedding jobs and people are losing their jobs.
Okay.
Yes, when that happens, I do think the prices could correct pretty substantially.
Okay.
I'll actually give, you guys should know this too, because you're part of this. I think a buffer to that is now we have people like you, but even more importantly, the Blackstones and people of the world that'll raise, when that starts happening, will raise billions of dollars and start buying right away because they already have an engine to rent them out. So there could be a buffer down there at some point that it won't be as bad as the last time as we have institutions coming in to take advantage of it.
In the next number of years, let's say we got 21 trillion and growing. We have a lot of bonds that will come due, right? And is there always, the assumption is there's always a buyer for that. What if there's not? I'm just curious, because this is one of the questions I got asked to ask.
Well, I think there will be, but at what price?
Okay.
I mean, that's really, so I talked about what the conditions were in the bet that was going to extend the expansion and was having growth rate faster than was anticipated before the tax cut. The problem with that spending component means that's going to have to be funded. Well, the way that gets funded is those who buy American goods have to put that cash back to work, and they buy U.S. Treasuries. So if you set about attempting to eliminate the trade deficit, you're going to cut off the people that are providing the dollars to fund that debt. So it's possible that that could stop. That part of current policy is on a train wreck heading.
Okay. Who's the buyer then?
Well, China's one of them right now.
Okay.
They would not be.
They would not be.
In that circumstance.
I mean,
right?
Who would be the replacement buyer?
Well,
the Fed?
whether there are enough replacement buyers around the world, we would see. But it's not going to just be Americans. They will require some global capital inflows.
Last question in this segment. The Fed controls the short end. Who controls the 10-year? How is that move?
It's determined in capital markets by global capital trades.
Okay. So
inflows and outflows.
So does that get influenced by rates of typical or other 10-year?
Absolutely. Right now, the U.S., I think I said this last year when I was here, we're the best looking horse outside the glue factory, right?
Okay.
So it's hard for the U.S. 10-year to go too far when the German Bund is at 0.5 and we're at 3.1 or something like that. So that's what I was saying earlier about the global capital market conditions will have an impact on how far U.S. rates can go on the long end.
What is Japan's equivalent to our 10-year? What is it?
0.
0? Okay. Didn't they raise it? There was like some big stink about they raised it to a 10th or something.
Oh, they were debating that.
Oh, okay. Didn't make it. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. We're
going to change it up a little bit. The topics this year are going to be a little nerdy. For this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about everything from 3D printed houses to artificial intelligence. So, nerdy, right? First, I'd like to call up Marnie Blanco. She is VP of Industry Relations with Dotloop, a company of Zillow Group. Welcome. She manages develop strategic partnerships with leading brands across the industry, and her background is tech innovation, product marketing, and technology platforms. Welcome for the first time.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. We have got Eddie Wilson, CEO of Affinity Worldwide, which controls over 80 brands, including ThinkRealty, the National Real Estate Insurance Group, and the American Association of Private Lenders. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, one of our all-time favorites, Sean O'Toole, founder and CEO of Property Radar. He's been involved in technology and software since the age of 18 and has been a central entrepreneur ever since. Welcome, Sean. So, Marnie, I'm going to start with you. For those who are not familiar with Dot Loop, what would be your elevator pitch?
Yes. Well, I have to ask, anyone in here familiar with Dot Loop? Ooh, I love it when we see a couple hands come up. So Dot Loop is a digital transaction management system. So that's a lot of words for when you do your transactions. It covers everything from completing your agreements, your contracts, your documents, to going to the collaboration of all the parties within the transaction, to the e-signatures, out to the brokers to do compliance and checks, and then finally storage. So we do it all in one system instead of what many do probably in 3 or 4 systems.
So instead of PDFing it, sending it to an e-sign software, you got something wrong, send it back, and a transcats, got it.
Exactly.
So in 2015, Zillow Group bought Dot Loop. Why was it so important? What's Zillow looking to do?
Sure. Yeah, so we were acquired back in August of 2015, so it's been a little bit over 3 years now. And when we were acquired, it was interesting. There's a lot of speculation, and Zillow's always the boogeyman, right, in the industry. So everyone thought, well, what are we doing with an acquisition like Dot Loop? The end of the day, though, it's just to make the consumer transaction easier. And that's always been our mission at Dot Loop, is to make the transaction easier, not only for the agent and the broker, but make it a good consumer experience. And that aligned very well with the Zillow ideals and mission that they're trying to accomplish as well.
Do you have to be a Zillow agent to use the software?
No, you don't have to be with Zillow to use the software. We have, let's see, last month we were over about 450,000 agents, unique agents, were on the system. So we run almost half of the transactions of the US go through Dot Loop in some form or fashion, meaning that if you have an agent on one side or a co-op agent on the other side, perhaps a signature is going through, an offer is going through, et cetera. So no, our goal is to have everyone on, regardless whether you're with Zillow or not.
So complete integration of all the systems.
Yes.
We're about to talk about artificial intelligence. It gets thrown around a lot. Is there a lot of talk about that coming into play, and what's next for integration?
Absolutely. So integration artificial intelligence is a big factor at Zillow and Dot Loop. We probably even recently increased our AI team, I would say even almost 8x of what it has been. So it's definitely a big focus. In the Dot Loop world particularly, because we deal with hundreds of thousands of agents, we hear from a lot of them that the offer process is clunky and hard and difficult, and some people text, and some people email, and some people call, and some people, do all these different things. So we have actually put out what we call Dot Loop Messenger, that is taking a lot of artificial intelligence into the mix and simplifying the offer process by natural language learning and all of this kind of different ways to do behavior learning, so that we can make that process offer and we can kind of prompt it to be a little bit more streamlined than it is today.
Okay. Well, artificial intelligence is getting thrown around a lot. Sean, I have to ask you this question. Is the term being used correctly? There's a lot of technology in the real estate space. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it is, there's a lot of places artificial intelligence is being used, and a lot of places it's being used well. The piece that I think most people, they oversubscribe to what it can do. So for example, a lot of talk, Zillow uses artificial intelligence in their AVMs, OfferPad, and some of these others have talked about AVMs. And I guess anytime somebody's talking to you about artificial intelligence, take a step back, because at the end of the day, artificial intelligence needs machine-readable data in order to do something. So think about the last time you valued a piece of property and the things that you took into account, right? What's up and down the street? How's the neighborhood feel? What's the front yard look like? What's the floor plan, right? most of that data is not machine readable, right? So people think, oh my gosh, it's going to come up with perfect values for everything. When it gets to the point where there's the same machine readable data, right? Same thing with chatbots, right? So we're talking right now, I can see your expression and tone of your voice and all of these things, and I get to take all of that into account. Most of these things, Siri and Alexa, they're keyword spotting, right? It's today and weather. Oh, I'm going to tell them about the weather today, right? It's I think what some people believe it can do versus where it's really at. The gulf is still wide.
I hear it's using a lot of marketing right now. I've been talking a lot about zero interface for the last couple years, just preparing our company for what happens when screens go away. So as a marketer, when I say, hey Alexa, how often can I just say something and Alexa respond? And people sort of look at you like you're crazy, but if you've never seen a 4 or 5-year-old with an Amazon Dot, it's absolutely magical. We've all seen the 1.5-year-old find the phone. They can't talk, but they can find pictures and videos of themselves. The 5-year-old, Alexa is just the friend that will tell you anything, and even jokes that are hilarious to a 5-year-old. But there's also, my favorite video probably of last year was Italian Google grandmother. Watching an 8-year-old who got the she got the Google Mini, I think, for Christmas, and she's, through a very thick accent, trying to get Google to tell her what the weather. Google, what the weather is! And she's banging on it, and the kids are laughing. It's hilarious. But the magic part is when it works, and you see the look on her face, and she just realizes she has a friend, and it doesn't matter if you're 5, or if you're 80 with a really thick Italian accent. The goal is we're not looking at screens anymore. User interface, I mean, Apple's made their entire life out of making it so beautiful and easy to get what you need, but now you're just talking into thin air. So we very specifically this year, it was the very first year for I Survive Real Estate, we didn't interview people before the event because we were so busy interviewing people. We interviewed offers.com. One of their pitches is within a 70% certainty, they're going to know when somebody sells within 1 year. Uh-oh, you're smiling. Now, to be fair, that's probably in the best city. If you go to different cities and you click on the areas, it's a different percentage. But a lot of us spend a lot of money marketing, and that's pretty significant. But is that artificial intelligence or just a lot of data crunching?
Well, so again, it comes back to, it's really more of a data question, right? So if you're Zillow and you have all the traffic of people searching for homes, you probably have a pretty good idea of who might be thinking about buying a home, right? If you're some other company that's just using public records data, right? When was the last time you went and did something in public records before you went to sell your home, right? So you really have to kind of like dig through and say, what are you making this prediction on? What data are you using? Could I use that data to make that prediction, right? There's nothing, what artificial intelligence does is it allows you to do things at scale. It doesn't allow you to do things that weren't fundamentally previously possible. And that's I think where, right? So could you go look at that same data and predict who was gonna buy a home? Well, yeah, if you can, then there's a pretty good chance now you can put up AI on doing that at scale.
Just remember when it was so easy, yellow letters, just. And Eddie, one of the reasons I wanted you on the panel is what you've done to the magazine is quite impressive. ThinkRealty magazine, the personal real estate magazine rebrand, and you're doing a lot of video and a lot of radio. I think as a marketer and a PR guy myself, the mix is getting difficult. And when you talk about zero interface, it's feeling more and more like we have 5 influencers. We're going to have to be going through the filter of either Facebook or Microsoft has Cortana, Amazon has Alexa. Are those really the filters that I have to learn to play in? They're not going to be going to websites anymore. Is that some stuff that you're having to think about now?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have 84 companies. And so a lot of the things that we're doing in mass media is to get people to raise their hand or force them into some funnel. Then we're using all these new tools, voice recognition on Facebook. Now you begin to say a product and we can serve you the product and you're going, how did they know that I just said that? Well, because of the machine learning that has AI attached to it. And so for us, it's getting fundamentally harder to to get them to take action, but not to find out who they are, right? Like, we're finding it easier to find out who is going to potentially sell their home in the next 6 months. We're finding it easier to find out who is going to purchase a car in the next, 3 months. Getting them to actually take that journey with you because of consumer trust is a totally different conversation.
I think there's a lot of opportunity because of what you just said, a brand. So I sort of made the joke about yellowletters.com, but I think most people that get yellow letters now are sort of laughing a little bit like, that's adorable, and toss. You're competing against, my big concern with artificial intelligence, for the last 2 years, Marnie, you don't know this, Zillow was here talking about how no, there's no intent of us getting into the iBuyer space. Something changed this year, but here's why I was concerned. They have the largest eyeballs right now of consumers that are doing their Zestimate and search on their platform. They'd know before anybody else because they have the data. For those of us in the room, what do we have as consumers? You get the point, but I guess will regular realtors and the investors in the room have something to compete with some of these big iBuyers? That's what I want to know.
Take that.
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to think about is these iBuyers, they're just it's a pretty small step, right? How many essentially iBuyers do we have in this room? They're just house flippers, right? They're just taking it a step bigger in scale. It's not like self-driving cars or some of these other things, right? I think in my mind it's a fairly small step, right? If we're going to take a step in housing, I would like to see maybe a much, much bigger step than somebody's going to buy and flip the house. I can imagine, maybe with blockchain, which is a fractionalized home where maybe I'm buying the right to live in the home and you're buying the right to have the home's appreciation and you're buying the right to some of the income, right? And, like completely different models, or perhaps a bunch of us pull together and we're going to all homes together. But if I decide I want to move, right, I just move into this other home and somebody moves into my home and there is no transaction at all. Like, that will be fundamentally different. The iBuyers, I think they'll certainly play a role, just like when we send out postcards and people go, I want to sell my house with cash and leave the tenant in it. They play a role. It's not going to be every transaction.
Well, since we're on the subject, let's go to iBuyers. Marnie, what changed in the last year? Why did Zillow decide to jump in?
So 2 years ago, I do know that was said. I'm very good friends with Nick Bailey, who sat on the stage.
He was on the radio show before the show. We're still very good friends.
If anybody knows him. I guess, first of all, you never say never, right? What we found, obviously, a couple points here. With Zillow, obviously, we have hundreds of thousands of agents. We make our money because they come and they advertise with us and they buy leads. What we found is these agents would come buy these leads and 46% of them would go unanswered. 46%. So agents would come pay us their money, we would give them leads, and they would not respond to them, which is crazy. That's just crazy. So that was one, that we're looking at this consumer experience and it's not great, right? Because that's their first interaction, it's not great. Two, we found that sellers were coming in and they wanted something easier. And we actually just, good timing, yesterday issued our Zillow consumer report. So if anybody wants to see that, you can just go to zillow.com/report and it will pull it up and it will give you a lot of good trends and analysis and information there. But we found that these sellers in the market, that 39% of them will choose timing over profit and money to sell their home, and that they needed a faster process. But when you went out there and you looked at like Open Door and you looked at OfferPad, we thought that there was a more industry-friendly way to do it, and so we decided that we're going to go into it and we're going to bring an agent into the mix, because we do believe that an agent is going to always be a part of the process, and that's the best way to do it, to really create the best consumer experience.
Now, I've heard a rumor that I've heard some iBuyers have had conversations with some large flipping companies that they don't have any intent of going after heavy fixers, hoarder houses. That's probably not the mix. This is open for anybody. Have you heard the formula? Is this really, we're going to buy light fixers where we can de-junk it, paint and carpet, and get it out the door? Is that the goal?
Well, from our model, of course, that's part of it. I mean, typically on the markets, we're only in a few markets right now, 4 or 5 markets. We look at the medium average price and then take maybe plus or minus 20% is kind of a framework. And then, of course, there's some other elements. I think Bruce was saying that when he was talking earlier that we don't buy homes behind gates yet, gated homes. That might be a part of the process as well. There's lots of factors.
Okay.
Aaron,
Sure, please.
Yeah, so I met with the Zillow rep there in the southeast where they're purchasing most of the properties in Atlanta, and their box seemed to be shifting a little, and it also seemed like maybe there was a little bit of a beta test that was going on, as well. Like maybe somewhere between 75 and 100 homes were being purchased. I know that we sold a few of them to them, and the box was radically different from one to the next. They were looking at some with equity, some with potential growth opportunities. They were looking at 3 beds and 4 beds, and so it seemed like they're still in that test case scenario where they're buying a variety to now watch how they perform.
Yeah, Eddie's very right. We are a big company of testing and trying things out. We obviously tested the Phoenix market for a really long time before we went in then to Vegas, and then Atlanta and Denver are the other markets out there too. So I would have to agree. I don't think that it's going to be everything. I think it's going to be a niche kind of market, and there's always going to be somebody who wants that sell side to be a little bit easier and more efficient than it is today. But I don't think that it's necessarily going to take over everything, as they said.
I was at a ThinkRealty conference, and I was really surprised. I asked the question. There's a lot of Wall Street companies currently in the private money space. And I asked the question of a hard money panel that included the software provider that gets access and sees a lot of lenders. I've asked this question twice, one at the California Mortgage Association and then once at your event. I asked the question, if we hit a recession, how many of them would be left? He said 85% would be gone. So on the table right now, we have some pretty big companies. Some of them have already hit, in the iBuyer space, unicorn status, like I'm calling it $2 billion. So Google Instant Offers, Opendoor, OfferPad, Knock, Redfin, Bungalow, that's first I had heard of them. Realty and Keller Williams snuck in this week, and they had already tested 100. So does this iBuyer model work in a year like 2008 to 2010?
So, I think where this really started was in not 2008, but 2009 and really 2010 with folks like Waypoint that realized, wow, we can buy these houses up and rent them out at a 7 cap. And let's figure out how to get the institutional knowledge around how to go after this market. And so at the end of the day, and they came in strong, and in a lot of areas really quickly brought prices back up, as they said, because maybe prices were at a 10 cap and they'd buy at a 7 cap, and they just pushed them up. So, what it really comes down to is whether or not there's still a return. And that's really, it's very simple. If there's a return in the market to be had, they'll still be there. So I think, it's then becomes a question of how bad, right? If it's a 2008-like, and prices are still going down, no, they probably stay out until it flattens and comes back in, and then they probably come back in really strong, right? So, but it's just a simple, it's a math. The thing about the institutional players is it's math. It's not emotion, it's not other things, it's math. If there's a return there, they're gonna be there and take it.
And they all have slightly different models, obviously. So Zillow is working in the agent angle.
Yeah, and I think, though, if you look at just recently announced this week, obviously Coldwell Banker with Realty, and then Keller Williams has been testing this as well. I mean, if you're looking from 2 very large public companies, Zillow and Realty, if they're kind of jumping this space, and we see a shift in the market coming eventually, the model's going to sustain itself in some way. I think the important thing is, though, is if you look at the shift of the market, back in 2008 and 2009, so forth, it wasn't like a cliff that dropped off, right? It just slowly kind of goes there. So it gives iBuyers and these different models, a little bit of chance to kind of play and test with the models a little bit. So.
It was really ugly in California.
Oh, yeah, a little bit more so than maybe some other areas.
We we may have already talked about this, but we had someone come to our office in Kansas City in the past couple of weeks that is going to broker the $1 billion fund that Amazon just put together to put into the private lending space. And so we're seeing Amazon that now is trying, and I asked a fundamental question, and the fundamental question was, why are you getting into this space, and why now, right? And the answer is we have capital we need to put to work. And so I think that right now, you know, with all the rate compression and things like that that are happening in the private lending sector, you know, they're also experiencing less of a yield. And there's so much capital available on the market today. And so the big difference to me, and maybe why they wouldn't, I don't even think they would get into the marketplace in 2008, 2009, 2010, and that is because the capital they have today is radically different than what they had back then. And I think today it's trying to find a way. And so I think there's two things. I think number one, they're looking for yield. Number two, the technology is dictating where they're starting to find that yield. You know, and so Amazon came to us. You know, I sat in the car on the way over with your dad and asked him a bunch of questions about private lending. You know, and I'm always amazed at his knowledge base and how he parses down a deal. How he parses down a deal is radically different than how the guy that was representing Amazon's $1 billion parses a deal. You know, and in his questioning, he was hoping for 6 or 7, %, and hoping that the deals over the span of $1 billion are going to yield that, knowing that some of them are going to be very bad deals and some of them are going to be very great deals. And again, it's a math equation that they're running a spread. And so it's a really tough question to answer whether they would be there or not be there or still be in existence, because I think that we're just in such a different marketplace, it's mandating their place in it.
When you told me that about them getting into the space, I immediately thought of what other verticals could these iBuyers possibly get in. I'm like, maybe Lowe's will get in it, and they'll buy the house, they'll fix it up and feature all Lowe's, so basically everybody's walking through like a Lowe's commercial. Or like, what if Wayfair, all of a sudden they're buying houses and furnishing them. I'm sort of joking, but I'm sort of like, there's a lot of different opportunities and ways to make money. When real estate changes hands, a lot of money gets spent in different areas. So,
well, I think one thing everybody in this room needs to keep in mind, right, is these iBuyers are just folks that went one day, oh, I think maybe we'll start to buy houses, but they went and got institutional capital, right? So why isn't there, for example, if you're a C21 or any of these big things, why wouldn't you give every one of your agents a tool so that when they're out there talking to the folks about taking their listing, and say, oh, by the way, if you'd rather, we'll just buy the house on any day you want for this price, but I think I can list it for this price. That should just be part of the standard, sales pitch and offer, and I think that will likely happen.
With these big trusted brands too, I think they're going to do what CarMax did for the real estate industry, for the car industry, but now you've got a ton of them playing at the same time. Very well-respected brands. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. I definitely have to make time to talk about 3D printing in the module space. Amazon came out. Apparently they love the Inland Empire. They invested in Rialto-based plant prefab, so spent a lot of money with them, well-timed with the accessory dwelling unit conversation going here in California. We had an event a couple weeks ago, and I was surprised how much work it took, but I got to interview Senator Bob Wachowski, who is the senator that is driving the conversation about ADUs in California. If not familiar with it, anybody with a single-family or multifamily home, and it's going to get more interesting come December and January because they are not done regulating it yet, you should be able to build a granny flat in the back of your property. Depending on the city, the state basically forced everybody's hand and said, it doesn't matter, after January 1st, 2017, whatever you wrote ordinance-wise before, it doesn't count, we need your new ordinance. A large majority of the cities did not respond, and I don't think they've been very happy, so they started layering on ways to make money, and the state said, no, and it sounds like they're going to do it again. So it's very well played by Amazon, but 3D printing, what does that mean when you can build something for under $10,000 in 24 hours? It took me $150,000 to build it, and I bought my lot for $100,000, and let's just call this the high desert. And somebody's able to do that and replicate it for so much less. What does that do for the price of real estate?
Yeah, so it's been 100 years since 110 years since the Sears Modern Home Catalog, hit the streets. And and that dramatically lowered, if you look at that, Case-Shiller chart, like that starts in the 1800s and has this big drop at 1910, that was why. Even 20 years later in 1929, you could buy a home out of the catalog for $1,000 to $4,400, which today would be $15,000 to $65,000. And it's been 100 years, since we've had that kind of major technological shift, right? And they did that by kitting these homes and pre-cutting the lumber and all of this and shipping it in boxcars, right? This is 1908, right? So it's crazy, but I think we're way, way overdue for that to happen again. I think 3D printing is one of the things that the company you mentioned, Plant, they're doing factory-built homes.
Modular,
it's not
correct,
3D
yeah.
printing. So I actually have, if everything goes well with Underwriting Laboratories is actually playing in this space. I should have one of the first 10 3D printed permitted homes in California by this time next year. So I'm excited about that. It's a guest house, but still. And stealth company, and I begged them to A, talk to you, and B, let me tell you about them here, but they're still stealth and they're in San Francisco, but it's happening.
I tried. They have a video. I'm like, what's your name? They're like, we can't tell you till 2019. They said they're going to come out in 2019. So, but we only have about 5 minutes left. I want to understand where it's going to get stuck. It's good timing because if it happens soon with the ADU conversation, politically, they just want housing and they want it affordable, and that will do it, especially if it's just ADUs and not whole homes. But I can imagine the unions and the jobs that this is going to upset. I can see a lot of people being very upset that this technology is going to roll out. Where is it going to get stuck?
I think that obviously, at the city level, they don't understand it, right? So, I mean, they're going to highly regulated. They don't understand it. I think just the opposite. We have a major job, construction shortage. These skilled laborers, we can't find them, and so we're actually looking at. I have a TV studio in Atlanta, and we're actually looking at this because of the high density quality of the printed material for all the soundproofing qualities. But the real reason is because we couldn't find a qualified commercial builder that far north of Atlanta that was willing to come up and work with us, So I think it's going to help. Even the situation out.
I'm excited about it. Do you think 2019 will be the year we start hearing more about, because they've already been doing it for the last 2 years in the Ukraine and Icon, the 600 square foot, Mike Cantu, I don't think he's here tonight. He was very excited about this. He sent it to me. I'm like, I know I've been watching this for years, but nothing stateside. Why?
Well, again, a lot of that, and it was really interesting to me that Underwriting Laboratories and some of these other things are starting to get involved to try to solve that, because how do you, the building code, right? How do you just change that so dramatically? So that is where the biggest challenge is, the building code and the rest, structural, what's going to be the wear, is this thing going to fall apart, what happens with the sun hitting it after 10 years? There's still a lot of questions around all of that. So it's going to take a while. We're going to see the first ones next year, I hope, maybe in my yard. And then I think we'll see a lot more. Longer term, right, I think the bigger impact is that it potentially replaces our entire housing stock. Because think about what it does for design. Think about the Guggenheim, in New York, and, the kind of very different design. It doesn't have to be square walls and the rest. And so it really changes everything. And, we may end up like Japan where, houses are worthless after 15 years. The land's worth a lot, but the house itself is worthless after 15 years. And on average, they're replaced every 30. So I don't think there's going to be a jobs problem. I think what we'll do is we'll start tearing down and replacing houses like we tear down and replace kitchens or bathrooms.
Wow, okay. Well, we have to end. Let's go down the line and just talk about, real quick, in 2019, maybe some of the technology you're most excited about.
Ooh, 2019 technology most excited about. I have to go on the AI plane there. I think it's going to be much bigger than people even think. I don't know if anyone saw the Google just announced their assistant who made the haircut appointment.
Oh yeah,
with total,
duplex.
Yeah,
Google
duplex
duplex.
with total natural language. She sounds like an assistant, and they're like, well, how about Saturday at 1 p.m.? She's like, that might not work. And she's, I mean, it's complete, yeah, it is really amazing. I think that's going to become pretty cool.
So interesting enough, our largest business is an insurance company. And if we can actually introduce AI correctly, then I don't have to sit there by the hour listening to actuarial science on where we're going. It'll just automate. We'll get the data fed in. We'll make our choices. But for sure, AI, especially in our business, interacting with our consumer base better.
I think, you know, in the next year, because of the ADU push, because of the affordable housing push, because of the lack of construction workers and the rest, I do think we'll finally start to see quite a bit happening, not even just around 3D printed homes, but more like bringing CNC and automation in the factory, so the factory-built homes, plant-built homes, catalog homes back to the, you know, Sears Modern Home in the 1908. I think we're going to see a lot happen there around affordable housing, ADUs, and other interesting stuff like cross-laminated timber, which can take beetle kill, right, wood and turn it into awesome structural material that's very cost-effective and happens to be a carbon store. So wood is a carbon store, and you use it in a structure, you're permanently storing carbon, so it's good for the environment. There's like all kinds of really interesting things happening right now in, you know, the construction space that's not construction as we know it.
Well, this is setting up for the next segment. We are taking our first break for tonight. The first break, the only break we're going to have tonight. We'll be back at 9 o'clock. Enjoy coffee and dessert, and we'll see you then.
The Norris Group would like to thank its gold sponsors for supporting I Survived Real Estate. Coldwell Banker Town & Country, Guaranteed Rate, and Nathan Chabollla. In-A-Day Development. Inland Valley Association of Realtors, Jason Thorman with Coldwell Banker, Jennifer Buys Houses, Keystone CPA, LA South REIA, Las Brisas Escrow, Michael Ryan and Associates, New Western, NorcalREIA, NSDREI, Orange County Real Estate Investors, The Outspoken Investor, Pacific Premier Bank, Pasadena Phoebe, Pilot Limousine, Real Wealth Network, Rick and Leanne Rossiter, SJREI, Spinnaker Loans, South OC REIA, Tri-County Association of Realtors, U-Direct IRA Services, White House Catering.
Gary Acosta is the co-founder and CEO of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, NAHREP, the nation's largest minority real estate trade association, and a 25-year veteran of the housing industry. He's also the co-founder of the Mortgage Collaborative, a cooperative of mortgage companies focused on increasing market share and profitability. Gary, welcome you to our panel. And Sean, welcome you back up here. Gary, I'm going to start with you. Could you everybody in the back, if you want to talk, please go out. Okay. Gary, could you tell us what the Mortgage Collaborative does for the industry?
Sure. The Mortgage Collaborative is about a 5-year-old organization. It is actually a co-op, which is a unique corporation. So it is essentially a group of small to medium-sized mortgage banking firms that pool themselves together, and they use their collective buying power to negotiate better terms with vendors, partners, secondary market providers, and so forth. So it helps them become more competitive so they can compete with some of the bigger guys.
They also share with each other in meetings what they're doing
Best
that's
practices.
working. Yeah.
That's right. So obviously the challenges, opportunities, just the process of managing smaller mortgage banking firms is different than the big firms. And you have the Mortgage Bankers Association that focuses on the entire mortgage banking industry, but co-ops like the Mortgage Collaborative focuses on specific issues that are relevant to small and mid-sized companies, which are serving many of the local communities across the country.
During the course of between the crash and now, you guys have had a lot of input on the legislation that finally ended up.
So you're talking about regulatory legislation?
Input.
So, I mean, I actually served on the Consumer Advisory Board for the CFPB. I was part of the initial group to serve in that capacity. So there's about 25 of us that provided input to the CFPB as it started the rulemaking process. So we were there from the beginning.
Now, what would be the beginning? You're talking about 2009 or 8 or?
So Dodd-Frank was passed around, 2010? Does that sound about right? And so
Okay.
I joined that committee in 2012. And so that's when most of the rules started to become implemented, like QM and all of the rules that we now know in the mortgage market that are affecting it in a pretty substantial way. So we didn't set the rules as a governing body, but we provided input to the staff and helped guide them. And I would say that had we not been there, things might have been even more rigid than they were, that they turned out to be.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Now, the final changes basically have been implemented just this year, is that correct? And will begin in January?
Well, I mean, if you saw the Dodd-Frank bill, I mean, it was a stack about this big of paper. So it was intended to be phased in over a number of years. And so we're just barely at the tail end of that now.
What will be the effect of the last part of it phasing in? Is it?
Well, I mean, there is, I think, the process has been going on for several years now. Qualified mortgages, and that rule was established now, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And we're starting to see the outcome of that a little bit. So it's kind of interesting because on one end, we're sort of implementing the last phases of that regulation. On the other end, you've got a new administration there that thinks that we need to scale back some of the regulations that were implemented. That's kind of happening on a dual track right now. So I think the net result is we're actually going to see regulations kind of take a little bit of a step backwards. I think from a business standpoint, most of us believe the pendulum kind of swung too far the other way.
Right.
Clearly, before the crash, the rules were too liberal, and it really made for an environment where lenders were doing loans that really they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
So it was necessary to come in there and tighten up those regs. But I think that in doing so, it created an environment to now, I think there's people who should be getting loans that aren't getting loans because the regulatory environment has become so rigid. So seeing that sort of roll back a little bit, I think is good for the market.
Okay. Sean, I've got to ask you, 3D printed house. You're talking about it's going to be in the back of your house in Truckee?
By the way, I have nothing to input on this.
Is it in Truckee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when you were building the home in Truckee, what was the snow load? Yeah, that's what I was at. I was mentioning a friend of mine. What was the snow load you had to have in your residence? Wasn't it like 40 feet of vertical snow?
Yeah, it was a combination of a 100-year snow event and a 100-year earthquake at the same time.
And your 3D printed house?
Yeah, the 3D printed house is designed to be structural for the snow loads in Tahoe.
Wow.
Now, it's a guest house. It's 400 square feet.
Right.
So an ADU, it would be just like an ADU. It's got a living room that has a kind of a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bedroom.
Do you see 3D printed homes always being at the smaller or less expensive end of the market, or do you think that'll just meander its way through everything?
Yeah, how many people can picture the Guggenheim, right, with the swirling in New York? Like, so there's no reason that things of that scale, right? It just becomes a lot easier to do, whereas kind of a marvel to do it when they did it.
Well, you know me, so my brain over there is thinking, and I don't know, do we know the cost difference per square foot? I mean, is it a half or is it less than half?
So for me, for my 400 square feet, it's going to be 20% of site built.
20% of the cost of site built. Okay.
20%.
Okay. So unintended consequences. So you have this invention that can lower housing costs by 80%. But you have how many trillions of dollars of debt against already established values? I'm sorry I'm bringing this up, but I could just walk away from my house and say, I'd like one of those 3D one printed up for 20 cents on the dollar. That'd be good to go. I'm being devil's advocate, but I'm just wondering, would somebody saying, wow, if we approve that, that could become an issue?
Yeah, perhaps. But to what degree does maybe land value come up to offset that, right? I mean, the house itself was always supposed to be a depreciating asset, right? It should decline in value every year. At least if it's an investment, right? That's still the way the IRS treats it, et cetera. So, that we've pulled so much life out of these homes is good in a lot of ways, but I don't know that it's catastrophic if it becomes easier to replace them. Now,
Okay.
hopefully, there's a lot of questions there, though. What happens to the old home? What does that mean for waste, environment? And I think that there's a long ways to go around all of this.
Okay. Gary, every time I look at the news, still about every week or two I see lenders writing $1 billion check for something they did 10 to 12 years ago. So does that have a chilling effect on any kind of aggression going forward when the industry is still seeing that? What they did back then, they're paying for a decade or more later.
Well, I think it has, and it's not just the fines. It's also the costs now because of the regulations to service loans, for example. So there's no question that lenders are gauging their underwriting guidelines and factoring in that potential cost down the line. So it is affecting the costs, and that trickles down to consumers. But it's also causing a lot of lenders to kind of scale back lending on what I would describe as on the margins. You see a lot of the major lenders, for example, who have completely abandoned the FHA program altogether. And so most of the FHA lending is actually coming from independent mortgage bankers, smaller mortgage enterprises. So Chase, Citi, I believe even Bank of America have dramatically curtailed their FHA lending because of the regulatory situation, as well as the fines that are being levied on almost every major lender through something called the SAFE Act, which is giving the government the capacity to sue lenders to up to 3 times what those actual loans were originally made for. So yeah, it's definitely affected credit availability, and one of the things that I think needs to be solved.
When you say they abandoned the FHA program, so even if their feeling is even if we did it perfectly correct and crossed every T and dotted every I, we could still have a losing effort.
Well, I think the feeling is if you're doing a large volume of loans, you can do everything to try to minimize the potential for error as much as possible. There still is going to be error. You're still going to have individual underwriters make mistakes, calculating, income incorrectly or whatnot, or an appraisal that maybe was, used comps that maybe weren't really the correct ones to use, at least in the opinion of the federal government. So there's so much gray area in lending. There's no lender who can solve for all of those things to be certain that they're not doing any loans that could possibly be construed as maybe done, incorrectly. Okay. So with that risk out there, it's just caused people to say it's not worth it.
What borrowers do you feel that really can't get a loan that should be able to safely be able to get loans in this market?
So one of the things that I think is a little bit, I use the word kind of camouflage out there, is that there's so much demand out there right now, and there's so little supply out there. We really don't get the sense that people who should be getting loans aren't getting them, because still, for every property that goes out in the marketplace today, there's multiple offers, right? But as that sort of supply and demand situation starts to balance itself out, and we see that starting to happen already, interest rates are creeping up, affordability is being affected by that, we're going to start to see the impact of people who really should be getting loans that aren't. There are going to be buyers out there who want to buy properties that can't. And those people that you're kind of pointing to, which are the ones that are on the margin and are not getting served, are self-employed borrowers, for example. So lenders have become so sort of, again, gone back 50 years in terms of the way they qualify risk and calculate income. And for the reasons that I already said, they're afraid to make mistakes because the penalty for that is so great. They're going to want to do loans for W-2 wage earners, things that are just safely in the box, people who make money through self-employed mechanisms, who have second jobs, who do drive Uber part-time or whatnot, which is a big part of our economy today. They're not being served in the mortgage lending capacity to the degree that they should be. And again, as the market starts to normalize a little bit more, we're going to start to see that. So I think Fannie and Freddie are starting to recognize that that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and they're starting to pilot programs to, I think, quantify income a little bit differently. But it is a gap right now that I think is a challenge.
Okay. Sean, it's always fun to hear what you're talking about. It was funny, I was watching the panel as you were describing blockchain and sharing of the one house where somebody gets this piece, another piece, and it was sort of glaze. I was so happy to see it. There was the same glaze that goes over my eyes. So I was happy someone else was having that same issue. So you introduced me to this thing called Hyperloop.
Yeah.
So I went online, I looked at it, and I mean, it's amazing that this is in process, and actually some of it's under construction as far as an attempted trial run in China from an American company. But what is it? What is Hyperloop?
Yeah, so this is, Elon Musk, I think, gets a lot of the credit here for this. But the idea is you take a tube, you remove the air from it, because air has a lot of friction, right? You move your hand, you feel the friction of the air. You remove the air from the tube, and then you put a car, you magnetically levitate it, which isn't hard to do, and then you can push this thing, and it's going to go really fast. So, the theoretical speeds they're talking about is maybe 700 miles an hour. So I came down from Tahoe this morning, and if there was Hyperloop from Tahoe to the Nixon Library, I would have been here in 35 minutes. So I mean, it obsoletes for the places where there are these tubes. It obsoletes air travel even.
For that distance.
Yeah. So this has really interesting implications for real estate that occurred to me when I was driving. We were going down, taking some dirt bikes and stuff and going down to Sedona, and we drove from Reno to Vegas. And as I'm driving, right, you have a town with a gas station, let's say Fallon, and then you drive an hour, and then there's a town but no gas station. It used to have a gas station, you see it there, the pumps are there, but it's dead. And then you drive another hour, and now there's a town with a gas station, but it's every other town as you're making this, 7-hour drive, and half of them are dead. And I really started thinking about that on this drive, and I said, well, geez, that has to do with the increase in range and the fuel economy of cars. You don't need every one of those towns anymore. These towns still have 150 or 200 people, but they have to travel an hour to get gas, right? And so I started thinking about that in terms of Hyperloop. Right, so you've got all these suburbs kind of say out of San Francisco or down here, right? But now you could have a suburb 350 miles away that's a 20-minute tube ride. What happens to everything in between?
Well,
these new greenfields, like the Las Vegas build it and they will come, suddenly becomes really interesting, to go land bank property in the Sierra foothills. With the idea that you're going to get a tube there someday. I find it fascinating, and I think it's one where there'll be big winners and big losers.
Well, I was just, playing with it. Let's say it exists at some point from Riverside to San Francisco. So you could make a San Francisco wage and have a Riverside housing cost.
Right.
You could get to work in less than an hour, and you're not driving. You're getting there like that. So again, unintended consequences. So would you really have a $2 million median price house in San Francisco? Probably not.
No, but what you might have is those houses converted to, high-end work center where nobody, people don't really live in San Francisco perhaps anymore. I'm just one possibility, right? And they all hop in a Hyperloop to a utopian residential only where there isn't work, kind of place, but there's great mountain biking and heck, we don't need cars, whatever. There's all kinds of possibilities.
I learned years ago not to, like when he says stuff, I actually listen now because he's told me stuff, starting 10 years ago, and I'm going, I don't even know what you're talking about. When you were 10 years old, your dad bought you a computer.
Yeah.
And that obviously that turned out to be really a special gift. And
it was 1977, so that was really the first Apple II. So
okay.
It's very early.
So your son.
Everybody knows I'm 50.
Your son Ryan, right?
Ryan,
when he was 10, you thought out very well what you would buy him, and it was a 3D printer. And you mentioned that to me on a ride to this Nixon Library, 6-7 years ago? How old is he now?
He is now 16, and he started a company almost this time, a couple months from now, last year.
Okay.
3D printing, and so far in the last 10 months, he's earned $20,000 3D printing out of the garage of our house.
Very cool.
So I think it worked.
Entrepreneurship.
I didn't think it was going to work for a while, right? He's playing, and he's like printing like Pokemon, or he does not into Pokemon, but he's like printing little stupid stuff, and I'm like, well, it was an idea. And then this year it finally kicked in.
Here's my question. Let's say he turns 10 next month. Would the gift be different, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, so it's really tough. One of the things I think back about, when I was 10 and really the gift of a computer at that point and how simple they were. Like, I really understood the computer top to bottom, like how a dot went on the screen. I understood that, right? You really can't easily understand how a dot is on the screen with a modern computer now, right? It's just the level of technology has grown so much, right? Where do you do that? I still think we're going to see a lot more automation, robotics. I think anything in those areas is going to be important.
Okay.
And,
so you'd buy him a robot?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting thing because I have, I've got a bone that I pick with all the STEM programs at schools, right? We're going to do a robotics program. Like, how many people have their kids in robotics club? And it's really the stupidest thing ever because it's the last step, right? First, you need to learn something about mechanical engineering and materials and software and circuit design and then artificial intelligence. Like, the last thing you do is you build the robot. There's all these other pieces, and there isn't a STEM program that I found in the country that really walks you through all the building blocks that get you not to assembling some robot out of a kit, but to really actually understand how the whole thing works. We don't teach that, and that's a problem.
Okay.
Bruce, I bought my son a basketball on his 10th birthday.
Was it 3D printed?
Was it made in the USA?
Gary, a question about the National Association of Hispanic Realtors.
Yes.
What percentage, you don't have to be exact, but what percentage of the growth, let's say, of real estate buyers is very likely to be Hispanic within the next decade?
Well, over the next decade, and this is coming from a number of different sources, including the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, that 55% of all first-time home buyers will be Hispanic nationwide. So it is a substantial part of the growth in the marketplace for the foreseeable future, for sure.
And their home ownership rate right now, the U.S., let's say, is at 63. What percentage of home ownership?
So it's about 47% of Hispanic households are owner households. But one of the reasons it's lower is because Hispanics are a much younger demographic. So it's approximately 14 years younger than the general population. So they're just moving into prime home buying years. If you look at the Hispanic homeownership rate of Hispanics over the age of 50, that homeownership rate's about 63%.
Okay.
So homeownership is something that is central, I think from a cultural standpoint for Hispanic families in general. They have a passion for it. We have a passion for it. And I think it's great for all of our businesses.
Okay. I want to ask Sean one more question, and then we'll invite all the other panelists to come back, and we'll bat it around for another half hour. Are other countries ahead of the United States in some of these technologies of Hyperloop or whatever, and does it matter?
I mean, like if you follow Hyperloop, right, the projects for the companies that are U.S. companies that are building this, right, when you look at the initial places that are interested in it, it's Dubai,
right.
And Japan has some very fast trains without even getting into Hyperloop. So, when it comes to fast public transportation, we certainly have not been doing it well here in California yet. I think there, in terms of technological innovation, a lot of that is still here. However, I do think you're seeing a lot more investment worldwide. I have overseas software developers, and at first it was a cost thing, but there's now places in the world where you're going to get kids who started writing software in elementary school, and by the time they've graduated high school, they've got more software coding experience than our college graduates, and by the time they're out of college, they're getting far ahead. There really are a lot of countries making a lot more investment in internet and 5G.
5G.
So things like that. Those things are happening, and I think we can't rest on our laurels.
What's the penalty for not being first in that world?
You look at something like 5G, which is the next thing after 4G. I think everybody knows 4G, cellular phones, right?
I wouldn't assume that. You're
yeah.
talking to one of them. Oh yeah, 5G is just one
5G.
more than 4G.
So, but so a 4K movie, right? You think about how long that takes to download today, right? You're talking about downloading a 4K movie in a few seconds. And it's not really just about, I got my movie faster, right? Now, if you can download, 2 hours of a movie in a couple of minutes or whatever, you can now have streaming real-time 4K. Add that to AI, right? You can be interacting with things that look virtually real, right? You hear about virtual reality, but now it can be mobile, right? So you could be inside of a moving vehicle that is projecting different things in front of you in real time. If it's augmented reality, where it doesn't completely block your eyes, but you still see the outside world. Imagine driving down the streets, and unfortunately where this is probably gonna happen first is advertising, right? You're gonna drive down the street, and a big arrow is gonna jump out in front of you in your car display going, eat here, and then, a clown's gonna jump up over here, and we're gonna have full real-time advertising jumping out of
But it'd be
things
safe
at us.
because we won't be driving our cars.
We won't be driving anyways, it won't matter.
I will say this, though, Bruce, to answer the question. I know I'm not the technology guy here,
that'd be my
but
guess.
I would say that not being first or a leader in technological development in the near future will have national security implications.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the position that the United States government and our country has right now in terms of leadership will be challenged if we don't continue to lead the world in that regard, which is why I'll give my pitch for immigration reform. I think the worst thing we can do, the dumbest thing we can do, is have people come to this country, get educated from our institutions, and then send them out of this country. Intelligence, skill, education, educated young people are the biggest asset and resource that we have in this country right now. We got to keep them here.
No question.
Just stay right there. If you guys come on up, please, and join us. I'm going to try to cover what I've heard concerns of. When I speak, obviously one of them, sales of homes. So all the flippers have talked to me about sales slowing. And I've even had meetings at the office So let's talk about the sales. Sales are down. So what is our opinion of why that is? Anybody?
Affordability, costs, interest rates, affordability in general.
Okay. Historically, I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative, but our affordability where it is in California right now, let's say 26, our volume of sales usually is exploding until we get to 17. It's higher at 26 than it is at 30, higher at 20 than it is at 26 because there's been momentum and all that. So, 26, unless, and we've talked about this to you guys, maybe because of lending restrictions, 26 is the new 17. Remember, maybe we're really butting up against that ceiling earlier than we ever have because people can't really qualify, okay?
We survey 1,000 households a month, and the survey is targeted toward the next 12 months, and we produce something called the Home Purchase Sentiment Index. That has flattened off and in fact tipped down just a little bit. We looked at two questions in particular 2 months ago. One, is it a good time to buy a house? Of those who said it's not a good time to buy a house, for the first time that we've done this survey since 2010, the number one reason was house price. On the question of is it a good time to sell a house, for those who said it's a good time to sell a house, the number one reason was house price.
Okay.
So in last month's press release, we said we believe that means a plateau in home sales. So the most recent month, both those numbers strengthened, and we concluded that yes, it's a good time to sell a house if you have a lot of equity in it, because you'll have a lot of equity in it, but if you have to buy another one, you're just going to give it away to that other person. So we've clearly seen at the national level a topping of the market.
And I just wanted to add, one thing you have to remember about that index is that index isn't based on affordability based on all available loan products. It assumes a 30-year mortgage.
20%
when it
down,
hit a
yeah.
17, right, we had pay option arms. So I would actually say that at the 17, we had much higher affordability in terms of what average person walking off the street could buy and afford than we have today.
Well, it hit 17 in 80, 89, and 05. It hit 11 in the
11,
nonsense.
right?
Yeah. So that's kind of why I buy into 17 being a somewhat legitimate number instead of 11. I wouldn't think we're going to go there either. Priority of owning a home. John, you've covered, you've broken down the generations in a different way. Has home ownership regained some of its strength of like people really want it, or is it
All the surveys I've read is that the desire to own a home has never waned really this whole time. The economy hit the people born. We broke the generations down by the decade you were born, so that's how I'll talk about it. But the people who were born in the 1970s got absolutely crushed during the last downturn, and that's where most of the home ownership fell. They had the highest home ownership rate ever at their 10-year high school reunion, and by their 20-year high school reunion, they were 11% behind. So they're making a comeback, but there's some distaste there, and that's that move-up buyer. I think what you're asking the question on existing home sales, though, is what's different this time is that we're requiring documentation, so the stupidity that happened at the end of the other cycles can't happen, and interest rates are higher, so people are not wanting to give up their fixed-rate mortgage, their great fixed-rate mortgage, to go get a higher fixed-rate mortgage. And I think those two things, as well as the price issue, are contributing to slower sales. And that's not Armageddon or a downturn. Those are just three differences.
Bruce, I would add in there too, I had mentioned earlier, we just released our latest consumer report at Zillow, is that 42% of the buyers right now are millennials, and half of all buyers are first-time buyers right now, which is a big factor in this, right? They don't understand necessarily how it works. The affordability is a factor. There's so many pieces of the puzzle there. And so when you have these younger buyers coming up, and we have such a large generation. You broke it down by decade, which is great. Millennials obviously a lot bigger from, 24 to 38 years old is a big population, but when they're first-time home buyers, that's going to naturally change the game and how it works.
Do we think there's some tailwinds for housing? What's your opinion of that? What would be some of the tailwinds that housing could experience?
If you'll give me the platform for a second, can I talk a little bit about mortgages? Because Doug and I have spent a lot. So while I agree with everything that Gary said, I want to make sure that I have a difference in what I think the conclusion was. And Doug and I have talked about this a lot, and he's going to be speaking on it at our upcoming event. The documentation is extremely tight, but 24% of all mortgages today are FHA mortgages, which are at or near an all-time high. So while the banks aren't making them, Loan Depot is. So the FHA programs are definitely there. Dodd-Frank said you should not make a loan above 42% of somebody's, all their debts should not be above 42% of their income. But we're going to exempt Fannie, Freddie, and FHA because it's 2010 and we're in a housing crisis. We're 2018 and they're still exempt, and I think 44% of all mortgages are above that number now. So we're very high debt to income ratios, and we have the highest LTV mortgages ever. So while the documentation is tight and the banks aren't doing some of this, I do believe that the mortgage industry, which by the way, 71% of it is controlled by presidential appointees now. When you look at FHA and FHFA overseeing Fannie and Freddie, it's not that hard to get a mortgage if you've got the documentation. If you're self-employed, maybe you don't have the documentation, but it's really not that hard.
And there is pressure to ease underwriting criteria, but if you think of the fact that demand, to your point about the millennials, demand is growing faster than supply, in that environment, if you ease credit conditions, it's pro-cyclical to price. And if, as we talked earlier, you're approaching a recession, the very people for whom you eased credit to get them on the wagon are likely to be the first people off the wagon. So you want to be really careful about whether you're not creating conditions where you're putting people who into a very highly leveraged asset at a time when there's going to be a change in asset valuations.
Yeah, Sean, you and I have talked about this to where, we could have said in 2009, okay, forget it. Anybody who's breathing can get a loan, because now their house would have gone up by 2 or 3 times. Yeah, right. We'd have solved a lot of affordability issues and everything. So we let loose of the reins late in the cycle, but we don't do it when it's most appropriate and most affordable.
Not only that, but in debating whether to attempt to halt the price declines that were underway, and that we introduced policy to prevent that, which means that prices never actually reset according to market fundamentals. So if you look at the relationship between incomes and prices, price never got back to its long-term relationship with fundamentals of income.
I think, this is just my opinion, but that's why I love to bat it around. I think there's a lot of safeguards in this market. So the fact that we have a certain percentage of FHA loans right now, what about all the loans that are in place? So, for you to have a price decline going forward, you would have to have, in my opinion, a glut of foreclosures emerge from this pile of loans that we have. I don't see how that happens. You've got the biggest bunch of trillions of dollars of equity, and we haven't refied our equity out this time. Probably not because we wouldn't have wanted to, but they didn't let us. So you have this huge pile of equity. Everyone has a fixed rate loan by and large, not a teaser rate, and there's no programs that could explode. You don't have a 2-year program that 2 years from now a lot of people have, and that's going to be a problem. We don't have that. We have a fixed rate loan that starts with a 3 or 4 predominantly, left the equity in place. The last 8 years, people have actually had to have down payments. They've had credit that they care about. They've had all the stuff that you qualify for. I mean, how do you end up with a gigantic pile of foreclosures out of that? And to me, that's the driver of price going down. I'd love to hear some disagreements with that. I really would.
Well, it would be massive job loss, because most people are living paycheck to paycheck, and if a lot of people lose their jobs, you'll have a lot of defaults. So but it's not anything else. It's just people need a job.
Okay, but what's a lot of defaults? Because this is the ratio. Let's take a look at a price, a median price. I'm just batting around with you. You know what that's. Okay, so in the 80s, that would be called high unemployment. In the beginning of the 80s, we had 9.5%, 10% unemployment. We had a 1,000% increase in foreclosures and no change to the median price. Go to the 1990s, and by the way, that was about 1 in 4 sales, if you will, trustee sales to sales. Go to the 90s, you have a ratio that got to about 40%, so 4 of 10 comps are theoretically an REO. And the latest one, 2008, it was 80%, trustee sales to sales. So I look at that and say, the 80s we didn't have price damage, 90s we had gradual price damage, and we had a catastrophe. So how do I determine what the next downturn, slowdown, crash is going to look like? I try to look at the ratio of trustee sales to sales, and that's where I'm coming from, is I don't, even though you're right, you're going to have all those charts go negative, you're going to have unemployment, you're going to have a rise in foreclosures, but if it only gets to 25% of the market, 1 in 4 comp is an REO, then the appraiser, when he goes out there, can go, that's not the market. The market is the other 3. If it's 4 of 5, they can't do that. It is the market.
I would only say this, is that, real estate crashes on a national level are extremely rare.
Yes.
But they happen in local markets more frequently. So I think the scenario that you described, while it might not be impact prices from a national standpoint, there's local economies that could be devastated if there's dramatic losses in jobs. And depending on where those markets are, you could see large price reductions in some of those markets. So I do think that's kind of the way it operated for decades before 2008. I think after 2008, we think again about the likelihood of another national housing crash. I think you're right, though, Bruce. The fundamentals are extremely different today than they were in the early 2000s, and a lot has to do with lending. And so, to go back to your point about, FHA loans are being made. They are being made by independent mortgage lenders. And as I said before, there's multiple buyers for every property that comes for sale right now. So the impact of, not having enough qualified buyers hasn't really been felt. But I think that can change as the supply and demand balance sort of changes. Also, independent mortgage bankers tend to be the ones that are the first ones out of the market when the market really gets soft. So if 95% of the FHA loans and first-time home buyers in general are being serviced by independent mortgage bankers right now, that's fine, but when the market does turn, a lot of those companies are going to retreat, if not get out of the business altogether. So not having the big lenders in there can have an effect down the line for sure.
They could stop lending during the next even a little bit of a slowdown because they just don't have the capacity to lend it, and who's going to be making those FHA loans?
That's right.
Some legislation that's going to get voted on, rent control for California. Just spoke at an apartment conference. That was a very interested group.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, do you think it'll pass?
I've been hogging the mic. I'll let one of them do
Okay.
it.
Anybody have an opinion? No?
I think it's a mistake. In general, I think manipulating the market like that always has unintended consequences. I kind of get it, right? I mean, we do have a rental affordability crisis, but I think you solve that by adding more supply into the marketplace, which is challenging, but I think that's the only way to get it done in the long run.
Okay.
I just say the only way you solve affordable housing is to actually build more affordable houses. We've made in my little hometown near San Luis Obispo, right? My dad hated this local builder because he just built these crappy homes with T111 siding and just terrible windows, and like everything about these homes was awful, but they were half the price of the rest of the homes. You can't legally build that home here anymore, right? You have to meet Title 24 and all this, environment. So you're talking about a home that cost half as much, and yeah, maybe it costs $50 more a month to heat, but if it's half as much and it costs $50, that's a good trade-off. Like, I really think we need to bring back the ability to build some subdivisions of really shitty homes.
Okay, I've got a.
Could be the quarter.
Well,
yeah, no, NIMBYism. Somebody said not in my backyard. And just to be clear, right? We are the reason we don't have affordable homes, right? I live in Tahoe, and it's funny, we have a local nonprofit who has two missions, right? One, mountain area preservation. They want to preserve the area as it is, and their other mission is affordable housing. Choose, right? You're not going to get everything small town stay the way it is, not in my backyard, and get more houses and affordability. Everybody wants affordable housing if it's far, far away. And that is our fundamental, problem. We've got state legislatures who maybe aren't quite as local that are trying to shove some of this down the city's throat, as we heard mentions to earlier. And cities and local, right, those local homeowners, as soon as it's a subdivision in their yard, an ADU with an Airbnb rental next door, people have a real problem with it. And that's the fundamental, we come to consensus around that, we solve affordable housing.
California, according to CARB, is maybe building 80,000 less homes than they feel like could be occupied. Is that about right, John?
I'm not sure.
Okay. What is the process like for a California builder versus any other place? Is it just?
Oh, it's just hellacious. I mean, I have national clients who build basically the same home here that they build in other markets. I mean, there's some elevation differences, and they're hundreds of thousands of dollars cheaper. I mean, the affordable housing solution is in Texas and Arizona, and that where is 62% of migration going? From Arizona through Florida into Georgia. And the public builder with the best margins and the fastest growth and the best stock prices, a company named LGI Homes, their average sales price is, I think, $80,000 less than everybody else's. They just came to Rio Vista in Northern California, and I understand sold 80 homes in 30 days. But there are 100, you have to drive to get there, but they're 100 to 200 grand below everybody else, and they build the same house over and over so they get it done more quickly. And a lot of the people, the home builders, look at them and say, that's not a nice house, because they, that's not where the other guys build. But they're people that are moving in saying, this is a palace compared to my Class C apartment that I was raising my family in.
Yeah, those homes my dad hated in our little hometown, right? A lot of them got upgraded over time, and they got stucco, and they got, dual pane windows, and they got, that happens over time. But those folks had a way in, in which they could do that. You force all those things at the start, they can't afford, they can never get in.
We've got 7 minutes left, and I want to end the way I normally do is asking either, you can answer either one of the two questions. I'll start over here on my left. So looking forward to 2019, anything keeping you up at night, or what's the one thing that you're most excited about?
My son just started college, so that's keeping me up at night. No, I do think that, I actually was on CNBC a couple days ago, and I said the outlook for housing right now, just based on fundamentals, is strong. And, I think investing in real estate right now is one of the best times ever. I think the demographics that you mentioned before are really what's driving that. And I do think that innovation in the process, which is what you talked about a little bit now, I think the purchase process, the whole process of buying a home has been, so difficult for too long. And I think the regulatory apparatus and just the unique nature of housing has suppressed innovation, I think, to a certain degree, but we're seeing that change. Because I think the process of buying a home is going to improve dramatically. If not in the next 12 months, certainly soon. And I think, again, because of demographics, demand's going to be there for a long time.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
I'll follow Gary on the son thing. My son having his driver's license and being free in the world is a scary thing.
Does he already have a pilot's license and a drone or something?
He's working on the pilot's license.
Okay.
I think the bigger picture thing that keeps me up, like, I don't think there's a problem here we've talked about, whether it's affordable housing or anything else, that we can't solve. Like, I have incredible confidence in that, but we've got to find a way to move past such polarized views on everything. I mean, this country was built on compromise of people with very different views, but realizing they needed to come together to solve problems and move things forward. And I think probably everybody's right, but about different things in different ways, and finding that thing in the middle is going to be really important, whether we're talking about NIMBYism and affordable housing or larger issues. And then what I'm personally most excited about kind of in the next year is I do think we're going to start to see, because of the affordable housing crisis and other things, I think we're going to see loosening up and trials in places and building codes around some really innovative things on the building thing. And maybe we are getting close to that, Sears modern home catalog of 1908, where we do see a big shift in how homes are built affordably, and with maybe much better quality, better environmental impact and the rest. I think we're at that cusp of that. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on.
All right. Eddie?
Keeping me up at night. I have a son that just started college as well, so that's a valid concern for me too. And the election cycles, I think, sometimes are a struggle when you look at the state of the current economy and where we are and what's going on. What I'm most excited about is being someone in my 30s who is running a very large corporation or multiple corporations. Is 10 years ago, I had to search all over the country to find the technology that I wanted to build. I had to find people that could build it. Today, young guys that are coming out of college, young guys and girls that are coming out of college, people that can write code for a living, it's like the new blue-collar worker. It's amazing. The innovation that they bring, you sit these people down in a room, and what they come up with is solutions. It's just the bright minds that are coming into the workplace. As much as people look down on the millennials, I find them to be extremely intriguing, and now being the fulfillers of all the dreams that I have. And so that's pretty exciting. And I guess a two-part answer to that is along with that, I'm interested in watching our industry as a whole legitimize itself. It's interesting to me that we get more invitations to come to Washington now more than ever. It's like, the real estate investor is now the new unicorn to a degree. There's so much happening around it and so much invitation. And so to me, I'm excited to watch this industry as a whole legitimize and grow, and for our opinions to matter. And I think that as we innovate and as we invest and as we move forward, I think that it's going to be a great year.
In the large picture, I worry about the accumulated debt that we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren. And that, to me, is a representation of the loss of confidence in market functions and the benefits of markets for creating wealth and income because of that shift toward government for all those things. So, but on the optimistic side, I noted, I was sitting at the table, I was listening, but I also looked up on my phone when the Apple Watch was invented. And it was 1946 in Dick Tracy when they introduced, so that was 72 years ago. So I just see lots of optimism because of all the technologic change. It's going to affect processes, it's going to affect costs, it's going to affect structures. Might have to get the local building code people out of the way to solve some of these problems. But I just see lots of benefits coming from technologic innovation.
Thank you.
So I would be amiss if I didn't say what keeps me up at night is my 2 almost teenage daughters and how much Snapchat time that they have going on their phones. But I did learn that if you call it chat snap, it kind of really gets under their skin a little bit and you can kind of poke back at them. So there's some advice for all of you out there.
I'm going to try that.
Actually, I've said it so much that they actually say chat snap now and then. Stop, you're confusing me. What I'm super excited about, obviously from our perspective, is just reimagining the entire real estate transaction and what can technology and data and AI and all of this cool stuff that's coming out, how is it just going to make the consumer's life easier? We have all these things like, Amazon out there, and we expect things immediately and we get deliveries like in a day, and God forbid it take 2 days to get something, because that would be horrible, right? So I envision and I'm excited about what that transaction will look like for when my kids grow up and they buy homes. It's going to look completely different than how we do it today. And I hope it's easier and seamless and a wonderful experience for them.
Thank you.
Well, it's funny, I also have a daughter starting college this year, but maybe this is a comment on men versus women. I'm excited for her. I'm not worried about her. I'd be worried about your sons, actually. And I agree with everything everybody said. I think the most exciting thing for me is just how much this industry is changing and how fast it's changing, whether it's what's going on online with Zillow, with the consumer-driven, or what's going on with the construction. And we are going to get a new person overseeing 44% of all mortgages in a couple months, so things are going to change there. And that's what gets me fired up, is what I don't know, and it's very exciting. I also want to end with one last plug. I got the opportunity a couple weeks ago. I went to a Packers game and toured the stadium, and there were 2 Make-A-Wish kids on the tour with me. Absolutely emotional. What you are all doing tonight is huge, so thank you for that.
So what keeps me up at night is kind of what's already been said. I'll put it this way. I would like for every elected official to not act like a Democrat or a Republican, but act like an American for the whole time. That's a pretty simple request, because that's what they're supposed to do. I do want to thank all the people here, including Carr, who's not here, have made it possible for me to look at data for free. No, it's really important, and look at historical data, to where I try to be able to put together a picture, and it's so much easier because it's shared. If they kept that, it would be very difficult. The book that you wrote, John, really was very important, because what I'm most excited about is what we're about to get involved in Florida with. That we're basically working with a large builder and have a chance to be in the path of obvious migration. And I wouldn't know that if it wasn't for people like John saying, you know what, this is how it's going to work. Because we didn't get to a lot of questions, but California used to win the migration game, the domestic migration game. That's how we got to be the #1 populous state. And now we lose it all the time. And other places are winning it for really good reasons, and that's where a lot of growth is. So that's what I'm excited about, is to be in the path of that growth with some of my chips. So I'm excited about that. Where's Aaron? Aaron, thank you for brainchild. Yeah, I'll give him a standing O. Very cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming. Enjoyed the evening a great deal. Thank you.
See you, Sean.